The anime begins with a boy narrating the eerie tale of a student named Misaki, who died in the 9th grade. But her story didn't end with death. Soon after, a student began to see Misaki at school, her presence lingering like a shadow in the halls. It wasn't long before the entire class started seeing her too, day after day, as if death had never claimed her. Despite knowing the truth, they all played along. Teachers and students alike maintained the illusion, whispering her name, leaving space for her, pretending she was still alive, right up until graduation. On the final day, the principal himself arranged a seat for her, as if inviting the dead to sit among the living, and no one dared to break the silence. The scene cuts to a clock showing a time, and a boy is seen lying on a bed. It's revealed that he is the main character, and his name is Sakakibara. His grandmother is there, and she was worried sick that this was his first time in the city and such a tragedy had occurred. Sakakibara is wearing a poker face, and a girl near him asks if he had informed his father yet. This girl is Sakakibara's Aunt Reiko, and he replies that he had not and that he will inform him of his condition himself. The city he's in is Yomiyama, and he'll soon be attending the Yomiyama North Middle School, where his Aunt Reiko is also a teacher. Not long after, 3 of his classmates came to his room. They said that they heard a new student would be transferring to their class but couldn't because he was admitted to a hospital. As a result, the 3 of them came to visit Sakakibara on behalf of the whole class. They introduced themselves as Kazami, Sakuragi, and Akazawa. They even bought flowers for him and told him that they looked forward to studying with him in class. What felt like a normal, wholesome conversation took an awkward turn when the 3 visitors asked if this was Sakakibara's first time in the city. All of them had an uneasy face while talking to him. As the conversation progressed, one of the girls even asked, "Are you sure this is your first time in the city?" A small pause happened after she asked that, but the silence was broken by Kazami, who introduced him to the notes of lectures he had missed because of his medical condition. The scene cuts to the event of Sakakibara being discharged from the hospital at night. He quickly runs towards the elevator in hopes of not missing it. He gets in, thinking he's all alone, but suddenly looks back to find a girl standing behind him. This creeps him out for a bit, and he apologizes as he steps away from her. The girl doesn't show any reaction. It doesn't take long for him to realize that the girl is heading towards the basement. He asks her why she is going there to begin with. She replies that her other half is waiting for her. He asks for her name as she leaves the elevator, and she replies that it is Mei Misaki. The scene cuts to his new home. Sakakibara gets a call from his father, who has been informed of his medical condition. Surprisingly, he's not that worried, as he also had the same medical condition some time ago. He didn't tell Sakakibara about it because he didn't want people telling him it was hereditary. The call ends as Sakakibara goes to have breakfast that his grandmother had made for him. The scene then cuts to Sakakibara heading towards his class along with 2 other teachers. He introduces himself to the class and finds a seat in the far back. He gazes across the room at Mei Misaki, who was sitting at the back corner of the class. She was wearing her usual poker face and seemed spaced out, just like the last time she had met him. The class continues, and after a while, it ends. During recess, the class gives quite a warm welcome to the new Sakakibara. Everyone was questioning him left and right about his personal life. Everyone was infatuated with the fact that he was from a huge city like Tokyo. However, Sakakibara liked it better in a small city here. After a while, the class had a PE period, where the whole class was running on the track, except for Sakakibara, who was not participating because of his recent medical condition. Another boy named Takabayashi came to him and told him that he looked like he really wanted to run. Takabayashi then told him that he didn't know what it felt like to run because of his heart condition, which he was born with. Sakakibara soon realized something suspicious about this class. He noticed how there weren't any other classes besides this one doing their PE. The question was left unresolved as he then raised another question to Sakuragi. He asked about Mei Misaki, who was the only one nowhere to be found. This took Sakuragi by surprise as she broke a sweat and didn't know what to say. Sakuragi then noticed Mei Misaki on top of the school building and rushed to her immediately out of curiosity. He reaches the top and begins to question Mei about the PE class. He also asks her about what she was doing in the hospital basement level. However, Mei Misaki isn't interested in his questions in the slightest and just tells him to stop. She then tells him something that takes him by surprise. She tells Sakakibara that the classmates associate his name with death. She asks Sakakibara if he knows anything about the class, and she realizes that he is completely clueless. Mei Misaki simply advises Sakakibara to never talk to her again and keep his distance. She then leaves him, saying goodbye. The second episode begins with Sakakibara alone with Mei Misaki once again. He tries to approach her, to which Misaki simply replies, "Why?" A really fast and ominous wind blows as Mei warns Sakakibara to be careful, as it could have already begun. The scene cuts to a part where the whole class is taking an art class. A boy named Mochizuki is making a rather abstract form of art, where the lemon he's making is covering its ear to protect itself from all the noise and uneasiness of the world surrounding it. This catches Sakakibara's eye, and he makes small talk with Mochizuki. However, it doesn't take long for him to notice once again that Mei Misaki is missing from the class. After the class finishes, Mochizuki and Sakakibara head out together, making deep talk about how the world and every person in it is cursed with an uneasiness embedded in their hearts. A class jester going by the name of Teshigawara interrupts their discussion and asks them what they're talking about. Sakakibara asks him if he's also ever felt this way to be true. He replies that it's definitely the same kind of feeling he had when he got into the cursed class 3 after reaching 9th grade. As soon as those words left his mouth, he instantly regretted saying them. Mochizuki broke his eye contact with Sakakibara, and it becomes obvious that they knew something that Sakakibara did not. However, he sees Mei Misaki through a small opening in a door and gets distracted. Impulsively, he simply decides to enter the room, even though his two friends behind him try to stop him. Mei asks if the students behind him tried to stop him from entering the room, to which he replies that they did not. He makes small talk with Mei, and the bell rings. The librarian comes over and tells him that it's time for Sakakibara to leave, and so he does, but Mei remains there, and the librarian does not seem to care despite the bell having rung. Curious as to what is being hidden from him, Sakakibara then visits the hospital from which he was discharged. He talks to the nurse who took care of him when he was admitted. Sakakibara asks her if there was a girl who died on the day he was discharged. The nurse thinks long and hard. After a while, she concludes that she did hear of a girl dying that day. She says that she doesn't know much about it, but she promises to find out if that's what Sakakibara wants. The scene cuts to the next day at school, and after the classes end, right after school, Izumi begins to question Sakakibara like it's an investigation again. This makes him quite uncomfortable. Sakakibara becomes lost as to what his personal life would have to do with anything. Just as Izumi is about to spill the beans, other students there interrupt her, and Sakakibara sees Mei and heads toward her. Izumi watches him follow Mei, and it visibly pisses her off. Meanwhile, instead of catching up to Mei and talking to her, Sakakibara decides to stalk her from behind out of curiosity to see where she is headed. He follows her into a dollhouse. Out of nowhere, a phone call comes, and it's the same nurse Sakakibara had tasked with getting information on the girl who had died on the day he was discharged. She tells him the name of the girl who died, and it was Misaki. Shaken by this new info, his curiosity is only ignited further as he decides to head into the dollhouse. He meets an old lady there, who tells him to take a look around if he wishes, but he probably wouldn't be able to afford them. He looks around only to find that the shop is filled with disturbing and creepy dolls that have a repulsive aura to them. He heads into the basement, and after wandering around he comes across a doll that looks just like Mei, and her voice echoes in the room out of nowhere. She appears before him and asks if the particular doll looks like her. She makes small talk with him, and then proceeds to ask him why he's here, to which Sakakibara couldn't reply properly. She then decides to reveal what she hides under her eye patch. As soon as the eye patch comes off, what Sakakibara witnesses is something very astounding. It's a false eye, but with a very odd aura around it. It reeks of a void and empty feeling, like the dolls around them in the room. The two of them talk about the dolls. Mei likes the dolls but thinks that one shouldn't be around them too much. They are hollow structures, both in flesh and soul. Since they're hollow, they seek to suck the life from around them. She asks Sakakibara if he thinks this hypothesis is true, and Sakakibara agrees. They both head upstairs, which is supposed to be more comfortable. Sakakibara musters up the strength, driven by his curiosity, to ask Misaki about the girl who had died in the hospital that night. He asks her if she had an identical sister who died in the hospital, and she was visiting her. However, Misaki simply denies having a sister. They then talk about the curse that is haunting Class 3, once again. Misaki finally decides to spill the beans and tell Sakakibara what was going on. She tells him that 26 years ago, there was a bright student who excelled in both sports and studies. He was liked by students and teachers alike. One day that boy met an accident and died. It's not even clear as to what the accident was. One thing was sure, that accident took the class by surprise, and everyone was upset. Not much later, after that tragic loss, one of the kids pointed towards his desk and said, "He's right there. He's not dead." It didn't take long before the whole class started to see him, and some of the teachers went along with the act. They even reserved a seat for the late Misaki on the day of the graduation. In fact, it's said that Misaki can still be seen in the graduation picture with a pale face. There is more to the story, but Sakakibara's phone rings, and he has to go home. It's time for the shop to close as well, so he has no choice but to leave the place and continue the discussion another time. The scene cuts to a place in the class where all the students are discussing what they want to do after graduating. Some students want to go to a bigger city like Tokyo, whereas others are wondering if their grades are even good enough for high school. Everyone soon heads home, but it's raining outside, and Sakakibara does not have an umbrella. Sakuragi offers to walk home with him since she has an umbrella. Just as they're about to head out of the building, Sakakibara asks Sakuragi what she thinks about Misaki. But she just freezes after hearing that sentence and abruptly replies to never use that name again. Toshigawara also appears out of nowhere, exiting the building as well, so Sakakibara asks him about the story that happened 26 years ago. He simply says that he doesn't believe in those things, clearly trying to dismiss and change the topic. Later that night, he decides to ask Reiko about the story, and she does know about it and tries to think hard on the matter to talk to Sakakibara about it, but she's too beat up from her job to keep the conversation going. The next day at school, Sakakibara once again witnesses Misaki on top of the school. Out of pure curiosity, he decides to head toward her. Some of the other students catch him going there, so Toshigawara decides to call him and stop him in sheer frustration. Sakakibara was frustrated with the half-baked replies from all of his class members and tells him to spill the truth about what happened 26 years ago. Toshigawara tells him that he'll do that next month, but first, Sakakibara has to stop chasing after things that don't exist. Not knowing what to do, he cuts the call and simply heads home. When he's studying, the nurse who was helping him find out about the girl that died in the hospital that night calls him. She tells him the name of the victim was Misaki Fujioka. The next day, when the exam happens, Sakakibara finishes quite early and meets up with Mei Misaki once again. He asks her about Misaki Fujioka. Mei tells him that she was her cousin. Sakakibara finally addresses the elephant in the room. He asks Mei Misaki why everyone in the class acts like she doesn't exist. It's not just the students. Everyone, including the teachers, acts like she's nothing more than a ghost. Mei simply replies that she doesn't exist at all. This takes Sakakibara by complete surprise. He begins to wonder if he really is the one seeing things. He begins to doubt his sanity. Out of nowhere, Sakuragi appears and looks at the two of them standing there. She is bewildered at the sight and begins to panic like she's seen a ghost. She instantly tries to run away from them as fast as she can with an umbrella in her hand. To her dismay, she trips over the stairs and loses the umbrella from her hand. The umbrella's ferrule stabs through her throat like butter, greeting her with an untimely, gruesome death. The story about the tragic death of Sakuragi spread like wildfire among the students of the school. They all began to talk about the curse, and some of them were aware that when the curse of Class 3 starts, at least one person dies each month. But that wasn't all. Sakuragi's mother also met her demise the very day her daughter died in a car accident. The scene cuts to Sakakibara visiting the hospital for his regular checkups after being discharged. Mizuno, the nurse friend of Sakakibara, comes over to ask him about his health, and he replies that he won't be admitted to the hospital anytime soon, since the checkup came out normal. They both decide to have lunch together on a rainy day. They talk a little about what happened with Sakuragi. Mizuno's brother, who is also in Class 3, seems to think that what happened that day was not an accident. The conversation then shifts to Mei Misaki. Sakakibara tells her that there is something off about the way this girl behaves in her class. Mizuno is convinced that Sakakibara simply likes the girl. Regardless, he tells her to ask her brother about Mei Misaki. Their conversation ends, and Sakakibara heads off on his way, where he comes across a member from her class known as Ayano. They have a small chat, but their pleasant interaction is interrupted when a huge glass from a vehicle beside them falls onto them. Sakakibara manages to save both himself and Ayano, but this event freaks her out, and she loses all her composure. Sakakibara visits the dollhouse again, where he meets Misaki once more. They talk about the traumatic event involving Sakuragi, and according to Mei, it seems to have begun. And that's the reason everyone is terrified. This makes Sakakibara even more curious about what's going on. He presses Mei to reveal to him what's happening, but she refuses, saying that it's better if he simply never finds out. The scene cuts to Sakakibara reaching his home again. He tries to question Reiko about everything, but she is too tired, just like last time, to talk about anything at all. The next day, the entire class is talking about how the deaths have started and worrying about whether they'll be next. As soon as Sakakibara enters the room, everyone ignores him and takes their seat. After school ends, Sakakibara confronts Toshigawara to demand the truth about everything, but he refuses to do so, saying that the circumstances have changed, and Akazawa is standing right next to him. Akazawa tells Sakakibara that the whole class simply wants him to forget about this promise and never question this story again. During their conversation, the phone begins to ring, and the call is from Mizuno. She says that she talked about Mei Misaki to her brother, who is in class 3. Her brother got freaked out and refused to accept that there is someone named Mei Misaki in their class. This terrified Sakakibara even further, as he couldn't understand what was going on. He began to doubt his sanity even more. Mizuno, who's still on the call with him, feels something wrong deep in her bones. She's worried about what's happening. As she's talking to Sakakibara, she enters an elevator at the hospital. Out of nowhere, the elevator speeds up suddenly, going down. She's terrified as she realizes the speed at which she is dropping. As soon as the elevator hits the ground, her head slams into the floor with an impact that sealed her death sentence, and the call to Sakakibara ends. The next day, everyone in the class begins to treat Sakakibara differently. Determined to get to the bottom of this, he decides to investigate the class of 1972 in the library. Naturally, he doesn't find anything helpful, although he does come across a picture of his mother from when she was in junior high school. He and the librarian talk about his mother for a little bit, but they're soon interrupted by Akazawa, who tells him that there are investigators here to ask Sakakibara some questions. When Sakakibara visits them, they question him briefly about the death of Mizuno. Ultimately, it's concluded that it was simply a freakish accident in an old building. Nothing more, nothing less. Sakakibara visits the class again, only to find out that the whole class is gone. The homeroom teacher comes and tells him that he's dismissed for the day and that a new class representative has been selected, Akazawa. He ends the conversation by saying that Sakakibara should uphold the class rules at all times and leaves. Sakakibara is left standing by Misaki's desk, where it's engraved, "Who is dead?" He decides to walk home with 2 of his fellow classmates, and on their way back, Sakakibara tells them that he wishes to know more about what's going on. One of them replies that it's been decided for all of them that he should not know about it. However, Takabayashi says that he doesn't agree with this method at all. He tells Sakakibara that he can ask anything he wants, and he'll reply. But before the conversation could go any further, Takabayashi suddenly felt a shocking pain surge in his heart and collapsed. The 2 boys around them were shocked to see their classmate collapse right before their eyes. Before they could do anything, life had left Takabayashi's body, leaving them with yet another classmate dead due to the curse. The next day, things got even weirder. Everyone started to ignore Sakakibara entirely. No matter how hard he tried to get anyone's attention, he would simply get a cold shoulder from everyone around him. He decides to visit Mei Misaki that day in the dollhouse. They have a conversation, and Sakakibara tells her how he is now also invisible to the rest of the class, just like Mei Misaki. He tells her that, despite how much this new development stings, he's glad, because he now understands that Misaki is being ignored deliberately by all of them, and that she's not some ghost. She then goes on to explain what's really going on and why the 2 of them are being ignored by the whole class. You see, the tragic event that happened 26 years ago about Misaki didn't just end there. When the whole class pretended that a dead person was alive, it attracted dead beings to that class. This made the class closer to death than ever before. Ever since the graduation of that class, every class that followed suffered this tragic fate, where there would be 1 extra student who did not belong to the class. That student would be dead. A dead being can become a part of the class like this because one batch pretended that one of the dead was amongst the living 26 years ago. Here's the neat part. The memory of that person ever dying is removed from everyone's mind for good. And once that dead person becomes a part of the class, the only way to prevent the calamity is to ignore one of the class members entirely. It's to make up for the 1 extra person in the class. Since Sakakibara came to the class late, no one could tell him the truth entirely, as it would mean accepting Misaki as an existing member of the class. Now that the deaths have started, the class has come up with a new countermeasure. to pretend that the two of them don't exist. Now that both Mei and Sakakibara are being treated like outcasts, Sakakibara visits Mei in the dollhouse again. He then talks a little more about the curse with her. She even introduces him to her mother. Sakakibara realizes that the interaction between Mei and her mother was much like the interaction between two strangers. The two of them decide to go for a walk at night, and Sakakibara asks why Mei's interaction with her mother is so strange. She doesn't really want to answer this question and simply replies that her interaction with her mother has always been like that. They eventually reach a park where they discuss more about the curse and how the class counters them. Sakakibara thinks it's quite stupid how the class has resorted to treating them like this. However, Mei thinks it's quite a reasonable sacrifice, since it could potentially prevent a calamity where many people could die. Their night together ends with Mei welcoming Sakakibara to the club of the non-existent. The next day, Sakakibara finds himself daydreaming about dancing with Mei in the middle of the classroom. No one can interrupt them because they all have to pretend that Sakakibara and Mei do not exist. However, he soon wakes up from this daydream, realizing that this is something Mei would never do. I guess it's safe to say that Sakakibara really does have romantic feelings for Mei. The period ends, and the two of them spend their break alone, away from the rest of the class. Mei even decides to show Sakakibara a painting she made in the art club. It's a portrait of a beautiful woman, her face expressionless and sad, wearing a dull poker face. Eventually, they decide to visit the library to search for any clues about the previous students who graduated from Class 3, hoping to find a way to stop the curse. As they search, the librarian, Chibiki, interrupts them, and they engage in a brief conversation. Chibiki tells them that it's impossible to figure out who the dead person is. When the curse begins, everyone's memory of that person's death is completely erased, and all official records are automatically altered. However, after graduation, the old data is restored, revealing the identity of the dead person in the class. Chibiki also reveals that he himself was once a member of Class 3 but is no longer associated with it, placing him in a safe position. The ones truly in danger, he claims, are the students, teachers, and their families in Class 3. Sakakibara returns home and tries to talk to Reiko about everything that's been happening, but, as usual, she doesn't have the energy to recall anything, leaving him frustrated. He begins to wonder if she, too, is now treating him as though he doesn't exist. With that thought, he decides to stop pressing her about it. The next day, something even colder and more unsettling happens. The homeroom teacher appears in class, holding an odd bag. He apologizes to the students and tells them that they won't be able to graduate together. Then, without warning, he pulls out a large knife from the bag. The next episode begins with the teacher pulling out the knife, his movements erratic and filled with hesitation. For a moment it seems like he's unsure. But then he finds the resolve in himself and slits his throat wide open right in front of the class. Blood pours from the wound, splattering across the front row, drenching the students in crimson-red blood. A wave of panic floods the room as the classmates scream and flee in horror, unable to comprehend the gruesome scene unfolding before them. Chibiki is the first to rush in, his face etched with a look of grim recognition. He quickly spots Reiko, still frozen in shock, and urgently tells her to call an ambulance. Mei remains eerily calm throughout the chaos, her usual composed demeanor unshaken. As she watches the scene unfold, she turns to Sakakibara and softly states that the class's attempt to make two people non-existent didn't work. Her voice carries a quiet certainty as she observes the failure of their last-ditch effort to prevent the curse from taking hold. Further investigation into the tragic events reveals more unsettling truths. It is discovered that the teacher who took his own life had a much darker and more personal reason for his actions. That same day, he had also killed his own mother, who had been terminally ill and in a coma. Her suffering, combined with his own inability to live a fulfilling life as a bachelor, pushed him into a state of despair. The unbearable weight of both his emotional burden and his deteriorating mental state led him to end his life in front of his students. Despite these revelations, everyone in the class, including Sakakibara and Mei, understands that the curse is still very much the driving force behind these tragedies. The pattern cannot be ignored. The curse seems to pull people into its grip. The fact that this horrific chain of events continued despite their attempts to erase their existence reinforces the frightening power the curse holds over them. Every dark cloud has a silver lining, and this death meant that the charm was no longer working. Hence, Sakakibara and Mei were allowed to exist again in the eyes of the rest of Class 3. Sakakibara, Mei, Akazawa, and Teshigawara have a small chat on the roof of the school. Akazawa thinks that it's no use considering anyone non-existent now, as the calamity is clearly on a rampage. However, this doesn't mean that they're off the hook. She thinks that the entire class will blame Mei and Sakakibara entirely when things get further out of hand. Not long after the incident with the homeroom teacher, Mei and Sakakibara decide to visit Chibiki in the library. They try to get to the bottom of this curse, and Chibiki gives them one important clue. He tells them that there was one class that went to Yomiyama Shrine on a trip in hopes of ending the curse, and they successfully managed to stop the calamity entirely, even though it had already begun for them. Sakakibara thinks that maybe it's a good idea to visit that shrine again. However, Chibiki also tells them that the students of the following year's class 3 also tried visiting the shrine to end the curse, but it wasn't effective for them at all. In other words, it might not be the shrine itself that stopped the curse for that class. It is eventually concluded that the curse might be uplifted if they go on a class trip outside the city at the start of August. Reiko soon declares the class trip to all the members of the class. Meanwhile, Sakakibara has a nightmare. He is running around the school, and at every turn he comes across students who keep telling him that Sakakibara is the dead one who is extra in the class. He wakes up from the nightmare, wondering if he really is the dead one, since it could be anyone. Even the dead person does not know they're dead. To top it off, he's the only one who joined the class late due to an incident related to his health. He is unable to shake off this feeling entirely. He then talks to his dad on the phone for a bit and asks about his mom. Although he isn't much help at all, Sakakibara doesn't want to tell him about what's going on with his life, as it would cause unnecessary panic. Akazawa decides to invite Sakakibara to a restaurant where they discuss this matter further. Akazawa states that she once thought Sakakibara was the dead one. She had theorized that since her mother died giving birth to Sakakibara, there might have been a chance that he also died along with her mother. And now, after 15 years, Sakakibara might have come back as one of the dead. This makes the young Sakakibara quite nervous, but she instantly says that she no longer believes this to be true. Sakakibara asks why she's so confident that he's not the dead one. She replies that when she touched his hands they felt warm. The dead have really cold hands. But that was not the only reason. She also felt that she had shaken Sakakibara's hand elsewhere. She just can't seem to remember when. Other class members also arrive at the table, and the waitress is actually Akazawa's relative. She has a lead that may help them resolve the curse. According to her, there is a man named Matsunaga, who stopped the calamity 15 years ago when he was a member of the class. Whenever the waitress would ask him about how the calamity was stopped, he would become afraid and say that it wasn't his fault that the calamity happened. He did what he had to do to save everyone. When the waitress would press him on what exactly happened, he'd always say that he couldn't remember. This made it clear to Class 3 that they had to somehow get to Matsunaga. After their meeting at the restaurant ended, Sakakibara visits Mei at her home, the dollhouse. They have a little talk, and by the end of it, Mei even gives him her phone number despite not liking it whenever her phone rings. They also talk about how anyone could be the dead one, so Sakakibara expresses his concern about being the odd one out. Mei looks at him with the doll's eye under her eye patch, and tells Sakakibara that he's not the dead one. According to her, people that are dead or close to death can be seen with a unique color by her left eye. In the next episode, the time for the school trip finally arrives, as one of the theories for breaking the curse is to simply head out of Yomiyama City. Just as they're about to leave the city, there's an uneasy silence in the air. At the same time, an oil tanker is overtaking them. There is only one thing crossing the mind of each of the characters as this is happening. Will we be killed for trying to leave Yomiyama City? However, no one actually speaks it out. After successfully leaving the vicinity of the city, the tension in the air finally eases, and they begin to talk normally once again. Akazawa is sitting next to Sakakibara and begins to flirt with him slightly, but it's clear that Sakakibara doesn't know how to reciprocate the dialogue. They reach the hotel where they will be staying and quickly decide to head to a nearby beach. They have a fun time in the water, where they throw each other in it numerous times. They have a blast tossing a beach ball to each other, and Mei simply spends time playing with the sand. Sakakibara is the only one who comes to her and starts playing with her. They share a cute romantic moment when their hands meet while playing with the sand. Not long after, Toshigawara has a bright idea to hunt for their own food instead of buying it themselves. They divide into 2 teams. The team that manages to catch the most food will get to eat it, whereas the losers will have to cook for them. Neither team ends up getting anything good, so the match ends in a draw. In the end, Reiko buys some food, and they cook it to have a hearty meal. In the meantime, Matsunaga appears out of nowhere and sits beside Reiko. Reiko was the one who contacted him in hopes of learning a thing or two about how to stop the curse. They do a little catching up, and Matsunaga tries his best to recall what happened. However, he fails to think of anything that could be of help. Even though he remembers that their class managed to stop the calamity, he just can't remember the finer details. Just as they're having this conversation, an ominous wind blows out of nowhere and sends the beach ball far into the sea. One of the boys swam after the beach ball, drifting farther and farther out without realizing how far he had gone. Tashigawara called out to him, concern creeping into his voice. But from that distance, it looked as though the boy had suddenly stopped swimming. Everyone on shore noticed, unease spreading among them. Then, out of nowhere, a large ship emerged, cutting through the water at a terrifying speed. Before anyone could react, the boy was sucked into its powerful engine. A horrific sound followed, and within moments, he was torn apart, his body shredded by the brutal force of the propellers. Blood sprayed across the surface of the sea, painting the water in a deep, haunting crimson. The group stood frozen, their hearts pounding, paralyzed by the horror of what they had just witnessed. The cheerful air of the beach vanished in an instant, replaced by the grim realization that the curse was far from over, and death was once again among them. Everyone is more afraid than ever now. Many people from Class 3 are blaming Mei and Sakakibara for all the recent deaths. Upon investigating the student who died in the ship collision, it is revealed that he was already dead before the impact. The examination concluded that he had suffered a severe cerebral herniation, which was the actual cause of his death. It turns out that the day he was supposed to leave for the trip, he accidentally hit his head, which resulted in a severe cerebral contusion that wasn't examined. They also pointed out that he was vomiting severely at the time they were about to leave for the trip. Mei also pointed out that he was unable to swim, further proving the severity of the contusion. Meanwhile, Sakakibara is having yet another nightmare, and this time he feels guilty for all the deaths that have been caused. He feels like if he hadn't talked to Mei from the very start, the calamity could have been avoided altogether. In his dream, he sees all the victims blaming him for their deaths, and he wakes up trembling. Not long after, Sakakibara has a meeting with Teshigawara and one other student to discuss the curse further and find out any other countermeasures. By that time, Sakakibara had discovered something from Matsunaga. According to Matsunaga, after the calamity ended for him 15 years ago, he hid a tape somewhere in the old school building, which was originally Class 3's classroom. He can't remember the details, but according to him, that tape holds the secret on how to end the curse once and for all. Naturally, Sakakibara, Teshigawara, and Mochizuki decide to go to the old school building after classes are over. They also come across Mei, who was painting in the school. The four of them decide to head into the old school building to find the former Class 3. It takes them a while, but they eventually find the old Class 3. After searching for a while, they discover a strange tape with the following written on it. To the future students who are undoubtedly suffering. The four of them conclude that this must be the thing Matsunaga was talking about. They all sit down right there and then to listen to the tape. In the tape, Matsunaga mentions how they went to the Yomiyama shrine to uplift the curse. It was an old shrine, but it had not been taken care of at all. The students even cleaned it and offered their prayers. After the prayer had been offered, the teacher confidently declared that the calamity would now be over and that no one would be killed. However, that's not how things turn out. Matsunaga mentions in the tape that later that night, lightning struck one of the students, and he died right in front of him. This caused a panic among the other students who scattered all over the place. Just as the tape recording of Matsunaga was about to reveal how to break the curse, footsteps came from outside the room. They all went into hiding and managed not to get caught by the school security. However, Teshigawara accidentally destroyed the tape. The good news is that Mochizuki knew how to fix it, and he decided to take it with him. In the next episode, the class decides to go on a trip to Yomiyama Shrine, in hopes of uplifting the curse by praying there. They stop by at Sakatani Memorial Hall, where they'll be staying the night before offering their prayers at the shrine the next morning. The hall is completely booked for the students to stay, and no one else is there aside from Class 3 and the teachers. Since it's the last summer trip of junior high, they decide to take a picture together outside the hall as well. After going inside, Sakakibara, Teshigawara, and Mochizuki decide to continue listening to the tape alone without informing anyone else about it yet. The trembling voice of Matsunaga continues to narrate the story of that eventful night when the calamity stopped. He mentions how, that night at Yomiyama Shrine, he got into an argument with one of his classmates. Matsunaga pushed the boy so hard that he hit his head on a tree and died. This tape was not only meant to reveal how to end the curse, but also to confess a sin Matsunaga committed that night. He didn't know what to do, so he simply left his classmate bleeding there and went to the hotel. He couldn't sleep that night, expecting everyone to find the body the next day. The whole night, he didn't know what to do once they had found the body. At last, the sun rose the next day. But no one was talking about the boy Matsunaga had killed. This made Matsunaga even more worried, as he wondered why the body hadn't been discovered yet. He rushed to the site where he had killed the boy and found that not a single trace of his body remained. Additionally, when he tried to talk about the dead boy to his classmates, none of them knew who he was. They all thought Matsunaga was crazy for ever thinking that a boy by that name had existed in the class to begin with. This drove Matsunaga crazy for weeks until he realized that the calamity had stopped after he had killed the boy. This led him to conclude that the classmate he had killed was the dead person of that year. At the end of the tape, Matsunaga concludes that the only way to stop the curse is to send the dead back to death. In other words, kill the dead person of that year. In the tape, Matsunaga also mentions that he's starting to forget about the student he had killed. Hence, the reason he had to record this. Everyone was shocked at what they had just heard. They decide to keep this information to themselves for now, as telling everyone could wreak havoc among the classmates. Not to mention, most of them think that Sakakibara is the dead person this year since he joined the class late. They begin to ask questions like whether it's moral to kill a classmate, even if they have no memory of ever dying. Sakakibara even asks if it's possible for them to do it in the first place. Not long after, it's time for dinner, and all the class members gather around in the hall to have something to eat. During dinner, Akazawa stands up and publicly apologizes to everyone for not being able to come up with a proper countermeasure to the calamity. However, she thinks that Mei is also responsible for it since she was supposed to be non-existent and didn't do her job properly. Akazawa demands that Mei apologize to everyone right there and then. Mei simply complies with it, although Sakakibara and Teshigawara object right then and there, saying that Mei was not to blame for what happened. The situation eventually de-escalates when an asthmatic boy collapses at his table. It seems that his inhaler has run out, and no one can call an ambulance since there is no signal reception. Chibiki has to take the boy to the hospital himself. Meanwhile, Mei talks to Sakakibara in private and thanks him for standing up for her. They both look at some old photos of Class 3, one of which is from the Class 3 that was 26 years ago. Sakakibara comments that he can see the dead person is Yomiyama Misaki, as he appears paler than the rest of the class. However, Mei sees another color around him as well, proving that he truly is the dead person. She then concludes that her doll eye is reliable for identifying the dead person in the class. She then reveals one of the deepest secrets of her life to him. She tells him that her mother isn't really her mother. Her real mother was born with twins. One of them was Mei Misaki herself, and the other was Misaki Fujioka. Her mother also had a sister who became pregnant the following year, but her child died during childbirth. She was absolutely devastated, so Mei Misaki was given to her to help soothe her pain. Mei found this out when she was in the 5th grade, and this is exactly why she acts like a stranger in front of her adopted mother. Mei once told her adoptive mother that she wanted to meet her real mother, but her adoptive mother responded furiously, saying that she wasn't allowed to do so. However, even though she was not able to meet her real mother, she always had a good relationship with her sister. They would meet often in the park and even spend time at Mei's home when her adoptive mother was not around. They had a lot of fun together. Mei's sister told her that she wanted a doll for her birthday present in April, but that is when she ended up passing away. Sakakibara immediately realizes why Mei was taking the doll to the basement the first time they met. The one who had died was not her cousin, but her sister, and she wanted to give that doll as a birthday present to her. Sakakibara also realizes that the calamity actually started with the death of Mei's sister, long before he even started school. This proves that treating one person as non-existent wasn't working at all. Everyone else believes the calamity began in May when Sakakibara arrived, but in reality, it was set in motion even before that. Sakakibara asks Mei who the dead person is, expressing his desire to know in order to put an end to all of this once and for all, but Mei hesitates. Their conversation is interrupted by a knock on the door. It's Teshigawara, and he barges in out of nowhere, saying that he's done something evil. Teshigawara abruptly asks if both of them knew who Kazami was. To his dismay, both of them confirm that they know Kazami as one of the class members. He then confesses that he pushed Kazami out of the balcony, believing that he might be the dead person this year. Teshigawara had asked Kazami multiple questions about their childhood, but Kazami struggled to answer them. Thinking that his memory was blurred, Tashigawara concluded that Kazami might be the dead person this year. In a moment of panic, he pushed Kazami out of the balcony, intending to kill him. However, now that both of them know who Kazami is, it becomes clear that Tashigawara has killed someone innocent. Mei suggests that maybe Kazami isn't dead, which slightly relieves Tashigawara, as he hadn't considered the possibility that Kazami might have survived the fall. The three of them decide to head to where Kazami's body might have landed. On their way, Sakakibara hears something strange and, driven by curiosity, branches off from the group. Suddenly, a hand grabs his legs. He turns around to see a student drenched in blood, and the only words that come out of his mouth are, "The manager." Sakakibara rushes to the dining hall and finds a huge fire raging, with the manager lying dead, covered in multiple wounds. The whole place is in absolute chaos as no one knows where Kazami is, and there's a killer somewhere among them. To make matters worse, Mochizuki discovers that the tape is gone. Mochizuki and Teshigawara decide to search for Reiko, but they can't find her. In their search, they end up coming across the killer, who is murdering everyone in cold blood. They barely manage to make a narrow escape. Meanwhile, Takako is convinced that Mei is the dead person this year, and actively tries to kill Mei, saying, "Send the dead back to death." Sakakibara saves Mei but realizes that those words are from the tape. Akazawa is there as well and confesses that she also knows about the tape. Mochizuki had made Akazawa and Takako listen to the tape as well, since she was the head of the countermeasures. After not being able to kill Misaki, Takako didn't just stop there. She went ahead and broadcasted the tape to everyone in the class. As if that wasn't foolish enough, she also told everyone that the dead person is without a doubt Mei. This causes absolute chaos among the students, as literally everyone is now trying to kill Mei, with Sakakibara being the only one running away with her. Many students try to kill them, but with all the chaos and the building collapsing, some of them get themselves killed, trying to get to Mei. In the end, Mei separates from Sakakibara as well, amidst all the chaos. Chibiki comes back to the scene and sees that the whole building is engulfed in flames. He rescues a few students and helps them escape. Meanwhile, Sakakibara is still searching for Mei, and eventually comes across Kazami, who is completely fine. However, Kazami is now hunting down students, searching for the one who is dead. He tells Sakakibara that he might just be the dead person himself. Sakakibara tries to convince him that he's not the one who's dead, but Kazami has completely lost it and tries his best to kill Sakakibara. Just before he can land the final blow, Akazawa hits Kazami at the back of his head, causing him to faint. Akazawa tries to kill Kazami since he had already killed some students, but Chibiki comes and stops Akazawa. She runs away from there in complete anguish. Sakakibara continues his search for Mei and finds her in a standoff with Akazawa. Akazawa is completely convinced that Mei is the one who's dead, and she tries to kill Mei. Just before she can land the final blow, Sakakibara comes in and interferes with her final strike. Akazawa can't really convince him to stop defending Mei, so she just tells them that she'll kill both of them without any remorse. However, to her dismay, lightning strikes the hall, and a window near Akazawa shatters. Its glass shards pierce Akazawa's entire body. In her final moments, she finally remembers when she shook Sakakibara's hand for the first time. It was a year and a half ago when she accidentally hit Sakakibara with an empty can once, and they met when she apologized to him. This was her final memory before she dies. She asks Sakakibara, who is sitting next to her, if he remembers this moment. He replies that he doesn't. Akazawa smiles and says, "You're supposed to say you do, even if you don't." After sharing this final moment with Akazawa, Sakakibara realizes that Mei is gone. He tries to call her on his cell phone, and it connects despite the weak cellular reception. Misaki says that she must end this once and for all. She tells Sakakibara to stay away from her as she's going to kill the dead person and cuts the call. Sakakibara rushes in search for Mei and finds her next to the dead person. He is shocked at who it is and can't believe his own two eyes. However, Mei is certain that this is the one and it's none other than the teacher, Reiko. She is stuck under a tree and can't get up. Mei says that she to be the one to do it, as she is Sakakibara's relative, but he disagrees. Sakakibara takes shovel from Mei's hand and kills Reiko, even though she begs for her life in front of him. The calamity finally ends, and it is revealed that Reiko was indeed the dead person that year. Mei and Sakakibara take a walk alone where they talk about how no one knows about Reiko at all. They wonder about how they'll soon forget about all this as well. The anime ends with Sakakibara saying, "It's over now,"